Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and now that I've started putting up some training clips again of me doing some behind the neck push presses, some people have asked me, hey Jason, isn't the behind the neck press considered by many people to be a dangerous exercise? The answer is yes, and there is actually valid concern for that. So I think it's important now that I'm demonstrating the exercise to sit back and assess the risk and teach people how to assess the risk of an exercise like this for themselves individually. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing. Work on skilling at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, with any sort of behind the neck press, it's one of those exercises that most experts out there who look at it agree it is an enormous delt stimulator. Quite possibly, and this is arguably so, but there are people with advanced degrees in exercise science and biomechanics who do agree with this, that it is possibly the best delt builder of all time. Now, does that mean that it's automatically a necessary exercise? No, because you can use exercises that don't stimulate a muscle as much and just do more total work and get the same amount of growth. So people need to not get caught up in this idea of best exercises. And so it is important to remember this is not an essential exercise. And for many people, due to their mobility, due to different factors going on, the behind the neck press might not be an option for them in terms of safety because it is a risky exercise. It is an exercise that can easily put your shoulder joints and rotator cuffs into a compromised position if you're not very, very careful. It is an exercise that you can't ego lift with. If you let your ego get the best of you on this exercise, you are setting yourself up for injury. But interestingly enough, there are many people who have gotten extremely strong at this lift over the years, who have done it for many, many years without shoulder issues. Now, is that partially because they're performing the exercise correctly, or is it luck? And I'd say it's probably a combination of the two. Their individual structure, maybe performing the exercise well, maybe a little bit of luck thrown in. Because again, it is an exercise that can stress the rotator cuffs quite a bit. But you know what? A lot of exercises that get promoted on YouTube are actually more dangerous, in my opinion, than a behind the neck press performed safely. Or not necessarily safely, but performed correctly. Side lateral raises with the pinky up will absolutely destroy your shoulders. Upright rows all the way past your nipple line, those will destroy your shoulders. Flaring out with on a bench press, bench pressing above the nipple line to where your elbows are flared out. How about chest presses with dumbbells with the elbows flared out? Same thing. Those are all extremely risky exercises that a lot of people choose to perform for whatever reasons. I don't necessarily advocate most of those, but I do advocate the behind the neck press, and I believe my reasons for that are that the risk of the exercise can be minimized. It can be minimized if you pay attention to form, techniques, and basic safety rules, and you spend some time building up your shoulder mobility. Because interestingly enough, it's one of those exercises that poor shoulder mobility can absolutely hurt you badly on, but it's also an exercise that can improve shoulder mobility. So it's almost like a contradiction there. And what I mean by that, it's one of those exercises I rotate in periodically. I started doing it again recently after not doing it for a year. And the thing that I find every time I take this exercise out, I lose mobility in my shoulders. I lose mobility. And when I put the exercise back in, every time I do it, even with a lightweight, I feel a bunch of crackling and popping and things sometimes, and I start doing it again, and after one workout, it's gone away. My shoulders seem to move more freely. I have better mobility. Everything else once I start doing it again. But what I find every time I start doing it again, I have to build the weight up gradually. I will start very, very light. Like you guys are watching me do my behind the neck presses, which is still a fairly lightweight for my overall strength level, with 165. You guys haven't seen me ever do more than that on this exercise. I actually will start out sometimes as light as 55 pounds to rebuild the exercise, just to work on mobility, pausing at the bottom. Again, one of those exercises that if you choose for whatever reason to utilize it, I would strongly urge you to take time with very, very light weight on the exercise and work on your mobility. Take nice light weights, pause at the bottom. It's important that you spend a lot of time finding the grip widths that don't hurt your shoulders. And what I mean there is that if you can't find a grip width that doesn't hurt your shoulders, that still causes pain in your shoulders no matter where you grip it, you need to abandon this exercise. It's just not for you. And that's the thing with any of these risky exercises. There are individual biomechanics involved, and some people can perform them safely. Some people really are not built to do a given exercise. This is one of those exercises that you have to learn to listen to your body. And people need to learn to feel the difference, and this is where body awareness comes into play. Learning to feel the difference between fatigue in a muscle, burning in a muscle, versus sharp pain somewhere in a joint next to that muscle, because there's an enormous difference between the two. Enormous difference, and that's the difference between injury or not on an exercise like this. So finding the grip width that works for you, and for me, I do my front presses, my push presses really, really narrow. Right at shoulder width, sometimes a little narrower. With the behind the neck press, I find it's most comfortable all the way out here. So I'm pretty much 90 degrees from the ground at the bottom. So my forearm is 90 degrees from the ground at the bottom. Another thing that's important to remember is, like with any other press, a certain amount of elbow tuck is beneficial and protective to your rotator cuffs. What you want to avoid with this exercise is gripping at thumbs over in a grip that locks you into place. You need to be able to swivel everything freely so that when you're at the bottom of this exercise, you can pull your shoulders in more instead of letting them come all the way back. If you can let them, again, tuck in a little bit more, it's going to be easier on your shoulder joint. It's going to dramatically reduce the risk of this exercise. It's going to dramatically do so. So again, the false grip is really something that you need to learn to remember to use when performing this exercise if you're going to choose to do it. Finding the ideal grip width is extremely useful for keeping your shoulders healthy when doing this and reducing chances of injury. And the other thing is factoring in if you're going to do full range of motion or partials, because let's be honest, I generally promote full range of motion training on 90 to 95% of exercises. Everyone pretty much gets that at this point. I'll even, for most people, unless they have really short arms, we'll even promote use of deficit deadlifts for the deadlift so that they can increase the range of motion, make the exercise more difficult. But there are exercises where the full range of motion can injure your shoulders, depending upon your structure. Dips are one of those exercises. The full range of motion on a dip can actually hurt you. You don't want to go all the way down. Upright row, another example, going too high on the upright row, as high up as you can possibly move the bar, can damage your shoulders. These are exercises to where the benefits of full range of motion are outweighed by the negatives or the risk of injury. And that's just the reality of it, because injuries don't allow for the best growth no matter how much stimulation you get. Just like they've noted that the guillotine press stimulates the pectorals probably more than any other form of bench press, where you press all the way up here to almost to your neck. But the risk of shoulder damage is so high that it's not worth it. You can find a different exercise that stimulates your pectorals and just do a hair more work. You might have to lift a little more weight. You might have to do an extra rep or two to get the same pectoral stimulation. It's an amazing pec stimulator, but it will damage your shoulders. Then it's important to keep that in mind when we look at different exercises. Now, the behind the neck press, some people are not built to go all the way down. Some people are amazingly strong even at the bottom. There are people out there who do behind the neck push presses with 250, 300 pounds, do it for a decade, and never seem to have to need a shoulder surgery in their entire life. All right, but those people are also blessed with good mobility, probably blessed with a really strong structure overall, and probably just a little bit of luck in there. A lot of other people are simply not going to be able to do that. Some people simply will never develop, due to their own structure, the ideal shoulder mobility to go all the way down on this exercise, and so they choose to use partials. And that might actually be acceptable in this, because this exercise still works pretty well with partials. You're maybe not going to get the best stimulation, but it's okay. The problem is that a lot of people do it for ego. They short rep it for ego, and when they do partials, they just do them in the air behind their head. Well, just like with the bench press, what is it we discussed with the bench press? You're running a big risk of injury by doing that, because if it ever accidentally goes too far, you're going to rip something, you're going to pull something, you're going to snap something in your shoulder, because they're usually doing it with a really heavy weight. Now, the one exception I've known, I knew a guy who'd been doing behind the neck presses the same way for over 20 years, and in his early 50s, the guy could still bench 365 pounds. Guy was a lifetime drug-free, clean. He had just been lifting heavy weight for over 30 years. He started in his teens and all the way up into his 50s and just lifted heavy with A lot of big compounds, a fair amount of volume. The guy trained 5 or 6 days a week most of his adult life. And he was massively powerful because of that. But he liked behind the neck presses on a Smith machine with nothing to stop the weight coming down. And he would stop at the ear. But the difference is he also used a fairly light weight. This is a guy who could bench 365. I never saw him go over 150 pounds for partials on this exercise. Now, he had some massive delts for a 50-year-old natty. Tremendous shoulder development for a 50-year-old natty. But the thing is, he did these for a lot of volume. He did them with a fairly light weight. He knew his range of motion was just limited because of his shoulder, so he stopped at the ear on it. And he only used about 150 pounds, which for a guy his size, especially doing half reps, is probably a really, really light weight. But, you know, he would come in and do 5 sets of 10 or 5 sets of 15 or whatever it is that he was doing on this exercise, which is, again, a tremendous amount of workload. And it worked very well for him, and he never once complained of a shoulder problem after doing this exercise this way for over 20 years. Never had any shoulder problems at all. But how much of that was his genetics and how much of it was him just learning the path on it, learning his limitations on the exercise, what he couldn't and couldn't do with it, and listening to his body. He found the furthest range of motion he could comfortably do the lift. He picked a relatively light weight and just used it for volume as an overall shoulder girdle stimulator, and it worked well for him. The guy was big and strong, bigger and stronger than pretty much any other 50-year-old natty I've known. Bigger and stronger than most 30-year-old gear users, to be quite honest. But again, he kind of figured out how to perform this exercise in a way that was safe for him personally, used it to the best of his ability, and it worked really well for him without causing him any problems. And I would suggest to all of you, this is one of those exercises that if you're going to do it, mess around with it and find this method for yourself, what's going to work for you on it as far as your biomechanics and avoiding injury. And if you can't seem to avoid pain on the exercise, don't be afraid to throw it in the scrap bin. There are plenty of other shoulder exercises out there that can replace it. There's no point in risking injuring yourself with an exercise you are simply not built to do or can't develop the mobility to do when there are plenty of other things that you could use to replace it. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.